When last we left our hero, Jacob, son of Isaac, son of Abraham, he was headed for his uncle Laban's settlement to try to find a wife. While Jacob's father Isaac had basically done the same as a young man, Isaac sent a servant to find the right woman on his behalf. But the Bible tells us in Genesis 28 that the reason Jacob is making the long trip himself is because his twin brother Esau is planning to kill him for cheating him out of his birthright and out of his father's blessing. We saw last week that during the trip to his uncle's settlement, during that trip, his documents app decided to upgrade itself, taking away all pretense of anything. And he stopped outside of a camp, outside of a city called Luz, and there he had a dream. And then everything opened again. And it appeared before him not only the rest of the sermon, but the angels ascending and descending on a ladder. And it was there that he decided that he was in a very special place, that God must be there, and God also appears in that dream at the top of the ladder and makes the same promise to Jacob that God first made to his grandfather Abraham and then to Jacob's father Isaac. God promises to use Jacob to channel God's blessing for all the families of the earth. Now, that was hardly a promise that Jacob deserved at that moment. Unlike Abraham, Jacob is not held up as some paragon of virtue. And in the stories about him thus far, we have seen a young man who is a greedy cheat and a disrespectful scoundrel, really. But he's apparently a good cook, and he comes from a wealthy family, making his prospects with his uncle's family still pretty promising. So after the dream, Jacob continues on his way, kind of amazed, as we all are, that God would appear to him in that way. With that as background, we come to week 2 of our 3-part look at Jacob's transformation. Part 2 culminates in a wrestling match at the Jabbok River, a touchstone story for me. It also happens to be a story that couldn't be more fitting for our times as a world, a nation, a denomination, and a local church. Ultimately, it's a story about identity and conflict, theft and atonement. It's about broken relationships, fear and anger, the ways we resist grace, and what real courage looks like. It's about our attempts at easy fixes and God stepping in to make sure that we do the real work. It's about being willing to fully empty ourselves and take on hardship in order to receive and become a channel for God's blessing. It's about wrestling with our enemies until we can see even in them the face of God. One of the reasons I usually don't like the lectionary is that it leaves out too much. The passage we heard earlier is all you get from this story, which is not nearly enough. Context is critically important here. The whole reason Jacob is having this wrestling match at all is because his twin brother Esau may not have been able to hold on to his birthright, but he certainly can hold on to a grudge. It has been 14 years since Jacob fled his brother's wrath and had the dream at Bethel. When Jacob comes to the ford in the Jabbok River, fleeing the wrath of his uncle this time, and more on that in a minute, But Esau is on the other side of the river with 400 armed men coming to kill him. That is a pretty important piece of the context for this story, I think. So wait, now he's fleeing his uncle, the one he was going to see? What's that about? So let's rewind the tape a bit. Once Jacob gets to his uncle Laban's home in Genesis 29, we see that scheming and deception happens to run in that family. For several chapters, Laban and Jacob steal and deceive each other over Laban's daughters, Jacob's work, and who properly owns what. There's even some weird magical stuff with spotted sheep that allows Jacob to basically steal a bunch of Laban's flocks. It's quite the set of stories. And by the end, it's not really clear whether Laban or Jacob is the greater scoundrel. Jacob does, however, get the award for superior intelligence. And his last grab is to take what he believes is now his, which is almost all of Laban's wealth, 2 of Laban's daughters, 2 of their handmaids, the 11 children he's had with them all, and make a run for it while Laban is away shearing sheep. One of Jacob's wives, Rachel, even steals her father's household gods, adding not just theft but idolatry to the family's rap sheet. Then they quite literally head for the hills. In this case, the hill country of Gilead, aiming for the Jordan River and a return to Jacob's home. Laban gets home a few days later and discovers that everybody's gone. Where's all my stuff? Where are the household gods? Where are my daughters? Where are they? It's all gone. And so he takes off after Jacob. Jacob had a multi-day head start, but Laban catches up after 7 days, and they have it out, at least verbally. Laban does not have a strong hand here, and he's cheated Jacob many times over, a point which Jacob raises in their discussion. So the confrontation ends with a deal, sealed in chapter 31 with now the second stone pillar of Jacob's career. Looking at the pillar and a heap of stones placed around it, Laban says, "The Lord watch between you and me when we are absent one from the other. If you ill-treat my daughters, or if you take wives in addition to my daughters, though no one else is with us, remember that God is witness between you and me. This pillar is a witness that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this pillar to me for harm." They have a little ceremony, offer a sacrifice, and Jacob now has a boundary that he may not cross going back. That's important because of what is soon to be in front of him. Laban goes home, and Jacob continues his journey forward. Again, it's been more than 14 years since Jacob has had any contact with his twin. But Jacob appears to think Esau will be willing to, just let bygones be bygones. Money talks, right? So Jacob sends messengers to his brother to say, "Hey, guess what? Your brother Jacob is now really rich and can't wait to see you." What could possibly go wrong? The messengers return to Jacob and say, "Excuse me, sir, Esau is coming to meet you with 400 armed men." So this was not a good development. Jacob wasn't exactly nimble with his entourage. Being rich in ancient times didn't involve carrying a sack of gold. Most wealth for the Hebrews was measured in flocks and herds. Jacob is in hill country with 2 wives, 2 handmaids, 11 children, and at least 1,000 goats, sheep, camels, cows, and donkeys, as well as the servants tending to all of them. You don't just dodge an approaching army in hill country with all that. And the door behind him has just closed. So Jacob is in a spot. But he's also resourceful, and he hatches a plan. He first divides all of that, everybody, into two groups, thinking, well, if the army slaughters one group, at least the other group will survive. He then has a foxhole prayer, asking God to save him from his brother and promising to be faithful in return. And then he gets back to practical matters. Whether Jacob is actually trying to atone, or whether it's simply self-preservation, we are not told. But Jacob tries to right the wrongs done to his brother so long ago. Jacob stole essentially two main things from his twin: his inheritance and his blessing. Basically, wealth and status. So Jacob spends the day preparing gifts of wealth, totaling 550 livestock of various kinds. And he sends those in waves to meet his brother and the approaching army. And each wave is preceded by a servant who's bowing and scraping and describing Jacob as Esau's servant. Your servant Jacob sends these gifts. And then comes the next wave of bowing and scraping, and your servant Jacob sends you these gifts. It's reparations of a sort, giving back the inheritance he stole with the livestock, and giving status by taking a servant's role in relation to his brother. So all that is the full context as twilight falls and the passage we heard earlier from Kathy opens. Jacob, his family, and all the rest of that entourage, both groups, all the gifts, move into the ford of the Jabbok River, a tributary of the Jordan, surrounded by hills. And here the story moves from a concrete narrative about a particular family conflict to a mystical story filled with symbol and metaphor. It's almost in a way like the dream in Bethel, except Jacob is an active actor in this. The ford is a liminal space. It's neither here nor there. In the ford, Jacob isn't really on one side or the other. He doesn't keep everyone else in that limbo. He sends his family and all the rest of his flocks, herds, and servants fully across the river. But Jacob stays in the ford, which is exactly where he is in his life. Jacob no longer belongs to the life with his uncle Laban behind him. And it's not looking good for his homecoming either. He has a promise that God will be with him, given once in a dream, but he's not exactly lived the life of a spiritual hero and has continued to lie and cheat even after that dream and promise at Bethel. Does God's promise still hold for him, or does it end here? The days of pretending to be his brother, which is what he did to trick his blind father, are over. Unlike Isaac, God is not blind. Jacob can't go back, and he's afraid to go forward. The word Jabbok in Hebrew, Jabbok, means emptying. And that's exactly what Jacob is experiencing here. All his family and his wealth have crossed over. He's burned the bridges with his uncle behind him, and Esau wants to kill him ahead. In this moment, Jacob is empty of wealth, family, status, and relationship. He is alone. And he sits in the neither here nor there space of the ford of the Jabbok River, the tributary river that literally empties itself into the Jordan as night falls, contemplating how he ended up here, possibly on the last night of his life. And a man comes. From where, we're not told. Some Jewish traditions say it was the guardian angel of Esau, which would add an even richer layer of meaning to the story. The man and Jacob begin to wrestle, and the struggle continues throughout the whole night. By morning, Jacob has a new name, Israel, is convinced the man was God, and has finally earned his own blessing instead of just taking the blessing that belonged to his brother. The night of wrestling has cost Jacob. He has to limp across the river, but he does so with a new identity and a much deeper understanding of grace. I don't know whether this story is factual, and in a real sense, I don't care. What I do know is that this story is deeply true. If you haven't yet found yourself in the ford of the Jabbok, a place in life where you're unable to go back and afraid to go forward, wrestling down past events and praying into what seems like a void for help. If you haven't yet been there, don't worry, you will. And for the sake of your spiritual growth, when you find yourself there, if you don't stop and wrestle yourself free, you will be haunted by the space that's neither here nor there until you do. My own Jabbok River moment came on my first night in a small apartment in Atlanta. Newly divorced and about to start seminary, I'd sold everything I had of value to get into the ford. My French horn, the grand piano I had inherited from my great aunt, the classical pianist for whom I was named, gone. My mother's silver, gone. My wedding dress, sold at a consignment shop, not that it held terribly good memories anymore. My ex-husband got the dogs I loved with all my heart. I couldn't have pets in my new apartment. People dear to me had helped me move, but they were now gone, and I sat on an unmade bed, surrounded by boxes, and sobbed. I looked into the mirror, and no one looked back at me. Literally, all I had was the memory that as a child of 14, I had stood in the pulpit of my home church to preach for Youth Sunday and had finished with the sure sense that God was calling me to do that for the rest of my life. And so, empty of everything else, there I was. I didn't know a soul. Classes were still a week away, and all I could do was pray that God was still with me, even though it didn't really feel like that was true. Who was I? Why was I here? What lay on the other side of this emptying river? I wrestled with that for 2 solid years, sometimes winning, sometimes losing. I came out limping, but blessed. But the story is much bigger than our individual struggles. Jacob and Esau don't just represent individual brothers. They are also nations, Israel and Edom. While both are grandsons of Abraham, they're also different faiths. Esau married Canaanite women, as well as one of the daughters of Abraham's firstborn son, Ishmael. Jacob married women within the Hebrew people. The Bible is never only about our behavior and issues as individuals, not in either testament. The Bible's message is ultimately about who we are together as families, faith communities, societies, nations, and ultimately as a human species, charged in Genesis 2:15 with protecting an earth teeming with life. Figuring out those identities, both separately and together, is the work of a lifetime. But the key to beginning that work is here at the Jabbok River, the tributary river whose only job is to empty itself into a much larger flow. Jesus taught us that in order to live, we have to be willing to die. This story teaches us the same thing. Jacob's whole life to this point has been about grabbing all he can for himself. His very name, Jacob, we're told means heel grabber, since Jacob as a twin was physically born grabbing onto the heel of Esau, who was technically out of the birth canal first. He then grabbed Esau's birthright and blessing. He then ran to his uncle's settlement and grabbed everything of value there too. In this story, we are shown both literally and through metaphor that no matter what blessings God has promised to us, we can't come into possession of those things by grabbing for them. We only get them by emptying ourselves, by giving it all up, so there is room for all of that to flow in. And once we've wrestled that into the ground, when the river of our lives empties into the Jordan, we are truly baptized and given a new name to signify our new life among God's people. In that emptying, we are not destitute. The river still flows, but the job of God's river is only to be a channel, to empty what comes to us into the greater river that flows through the city of God. The river is meant to flow through us, not to us. God's blessings aren't meant to be kept. They are meant to be passed along downriver so that all the families of the earth might be blessed by them, which is God's original promise to Abraham, to Isaac, and then to Jacob. Back in the ford of the Jabbok, it's dawn. Jacob sets out across the river, and now there's not only an army out there, but he's limping. Esau awaits. What happens next is next week's sermon. Amen.